Welcome everyone to the Pearson Business Book Club. My name is Eloise Cook and I'm the publisher for the professional business lists at Pearson. If you've not joined before, we choose a Pearson business or personal development book each month at the book club and invite the author or authors to discuss it, and they'll give a webinar on a key concept from the book. If you need to leave halfway through, the video will be available to watch on demand at the book club website. But today, our book is this. So yes, our book of the month is Going Digital by Lindsay Jones and Balvinder Singh Power. If you've not got a copy yet, you can buy it through the book club webpage. I'm just going to post that in the chat so everyone's got the link. I think that works. So welcome, Lindsay and Bal. Really good to see you here. We don't often have both authors, so this is really exciting. We're going to be sort of handing off to each other and taking turns.
Yes, we've worked well together in the past, so hopefully we'll work well on the Zoom call. And if not, if it becomes fighting, it's a learning point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we're going to be strict on time today because Lindsay has to do to get on a flight as well, I think. So we'll definitely be finishing by 2. So I will introduce you both. So Lindsay Jones is a digital transformation consultant and coach advising on successful, effective and sustainable change management and content strategy. She is also a former executive editor of the Financial Times, where she led successful global transformation projects in the newsroom. Welcome, Lindsay. Balvinder Singh Power is English of Indian origin, resident in Madrid, Spain. He is a business and finance graduate who also studied a master's in mediation. I was going to say meditation. Mediation from the University of London. He has extensive experience leading business, social, cultural, media and technology projects in Spain and internationally. He is also a professor, speaker and business mentor, and a qualified and experienced trainer, giving sessions on leadership, team management and motivation, innovation culture, mediation, conflict resolution skills, and entrepreneurship globally. Crikey. So welcome, Lindsay and Bal. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I do always say this, and Bal will tell me off, but it was perfect having a co-author who was an expert in conflict resolution.
Very good.
That made life easier for both.
It did.
Oh, so Bal, before you start, I've got some questions for you, just that we ask all the authors. So just so sort of the audience and the readers sort of can find out a bit more about you and the book. Do you want to tell me, why did you want to write this book?
I think that's a good question for Lindsay, because the original idea was hers.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll answer that. Why did I want to write this book? So I think, as you said, I had overseen a lot of transformation in the Financial Times newsroom, and I do actually talk quite openly about this to lots of media groups and conferences. It was very challenging. In fact, it was so challenging, it inspired the idea for this book. And during my time at the FT, I had worked closely with Bal and decided that with his conflict resolution skills, that I would ask him to co-author. Actually, so Bal, I mean, why did you decide to co-author with me?
Well, one thing, it's very hard to say no to Lindsay. She used to wear Doc Martens, so I knew she was a tough character. But she's very influential, very persuasive. But also, we found we were a very good match, because the book basically has 3 parts. It talks about FT's transition digital, a very successful case study. There's interviews with leaders, and then there's an academic part which I could add to, because a lot of around change is something I teach when we talk about leadership, high performance teams, and skills like influence persuasion. So it was a very good marriage. I mean, the difficult part is COVID came along and we did the work completely online using video conference and Google Docs, but we didn't meet during the production of the book and the writing, which is almost 3 years. So that was another challenge of our era.
I've forgotten about that, actually. Yeah.
And sort of increasingly normal, I'd say, just to do a lot of stuff virtually.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I guess it was challenging in its own way, but I'm very deadline driven. So I set deadlines, and I set deadlines for Bal, and they were interesting conversations.
Very interesting. And we can't say that it wasn't necessarily easy, but it's definitely worthwhile and productive. So,
we work well together. We work well together.
We pushed each other.
We did. I would really recommend co-authoring. I don't know who's on the call, but if you're thinking of collaboration and writing, it was a really worthwhile project to do.
Very worthwhile.
Good. So, second question, what surprised you about writing this book?
I can tell you that. I mean, what surprised me is, writing a book for a particular audience is a fantastic and difficult challenge, because when you write freely, it's just you in your world. But what was the challenge, and something we achieved with the help of Pearson and Eloise, was to frame it towards who would be our customer. And that customer was the mid-manager who'd never managed innovation before, but there's no playbook. So that surprised me. And then also the power, which we talk about in the book a bit, about habits. So it's really about creating that space to be able to write. And in my case, I'm not a natural writer. I've written many articles. Lindsay is a professional writer. For me, I take 3 hours a day reserved in my time to work on the book. Sometimes nothing would come out. Sometimes there'd be some good stuff, but it created sort of the writing muscle. So for me, as important as the product was the process of completing the book with a particular, focus and also requirement. So the whole process for me was very interesting.
Yeah, and I think also what was surprising, I guess maybe surprising is not quite the right word, but what I was impressed with, I guess, was actually the openness with all the interviewees. We interviewed more than 50 people right across many business sectors, not just media. It wasn't just the FT story, it was many stories. And we were really quite honoured with the openness and honesty that people conducted these on the record interviews to be case studies as part of this material. So it gives it real heft.
Absolutely, yes. I know that some authors can struggle with people wanting to remain anonymous, and it really helps that we sort of know who they are and where they're working. I think it helps provide context. Okay, and how do you want readers to feel about reading your book?
I could,
go ahead, Lindsay.
Shall I go first and you can
Yes.
come in? Yeah, I'll take that. So how do we want them to feel reading the book? Well, we very much want, I very much want this to be like a guide, a playbook. I think Bal's already said a playbook. And it's because when I was trying to deliver enormous digital transformation projects at the time, I really wanted a guide or something to tell me what to do. And I couldn't find it, for that. I think Bal mentioned that team leader position. There's plenty of material out there if you're CEO or running the company, but as a team leader trying to make that board vision reality, putting the strategy into action, that was really tough at times. And I really wanted some kind of advice or playbook or roadmap, whatever you want to call it, to show me the way on this. I mean, Bal, what do you think?
No, I think you're right there. I mean, for me, what I'd like people to feel is empowered. Because as I also mentor startups, we know the great majority, 70–80% of projects, either in a corporation or startups, fail. The vast majority fail, but nobody helps us to be conscious about what are the tips to be more likely to be successful. And when we scanned the market and we looked through that with Eloise and Pearson, there were very few books around that. They were either really heavy and academic, or they were either not very tactical at all. So that's why, as Lindsay well said, it's a playbook. It's something you can pick up at any point, and it'll give you very specific tips and also exercises to get you into that innovator mode. And it was, actually validated for me, because when I talked to my senior leader friends, they told me it actually made them more conscious of how they'd solve the problem when they're problem solvers and they don't analyze how they did it. And for the younger new leaders, it actually gave them a type of path. So I think that was the part that really, inspired me to work on this, and the idea of empowerment and some type of clarity. Because there's not much in between the heavy academics and something that can really guide you.
Yeah, actually, I'll add to that a certain UK university is certainly buying some of these books regularly to give out to their innovation students because they think it's a very practical guide to how you actually go about delivering transformation in the workplace.
Fantastic. Right. I will let you start the webinar. So it's what works and what doesn't in business transformation projects. And a reminder that if you want to ask a question for Lindsay and Val at the end, pop them in the Q&A, or the chat, I guess, if it's open, and I'll keep an eye on them, and I'll be back soon. So take it away.
Great. No, thank you,
Louise. Thank you very much.
And actually, although we've got this question on the screen, we're actually going to ask you, the audience, something different. It's a poll. We'd like the poll, please. Thank you. So what is most vital to you to make your business transformation a success? And you've got several things you can choose. We just want you to choose the one most vital thing: planning, identifying a problem. Is it data? Is it support from senior leadership? Is it flexibility, or all of the above?
So we're getting everyone participating. We've got 60-70%. It's coming in.
Yeah, I think we'll be told or something. I can see.
80%.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, we did put all of the above in. I know it's a sort of bit of a catch-all, really. Maybe I should have left that out, because it'd be more interesting to have seen really out of those. And we can see that planning and identifying our problem and support from senior leadership and being flexible. Nobody has actually use the data, but you can see the majority have gone for all of the above. Any comments on that, Val?
No, it's interesting because we actually spent so much time as thinking about the index of the book and all the different parts. And actually all those points in the poll are the parts of the story of how to manage successful change. So it's interesting, I mean, all of the above, and you'd imagine that planning would be important. And I am surprised about the use of data, especially in the world we talk about of big data and AI. So all of the above is the easy answer. But I can see things like planning and being flexible are very important. And I think that's something we lived in the book, and we lived in our own experience of transformation.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's interesting that nobody hit data at all, because I even talk about data being central to a business strategy and business transformation. Actually, you have to clean up your data these days, and historical data can really cause problems for you. And that we do give you some tips in the book in terms of what you can do in your workplace to clean up your data, actually.
And actually, we talk about the quality of data and how we receive it and the bias in the data, because as we say, typically it's the new oil. So it helps you to make more strategic decisions, but where that data comes from is key. And if it's really something that's going to help you with your product and your target consumer.
Yeah, in fact, if you think about what works and what doesn't work, so good data works, but if your data is bad and has got that bias in it, then it really could actually start to work against you. Has the poll finished? Yes. Okay. So what we're going to sort of spend this webinar looking at is 7 keys to going digital. And you can see here we've put them out. Planning, it's crucial. Identify your problem. Use data to back up your plan. Map out who's going to help you. That is crucial. Sometimes you can oversee it. Forget about it, I mean. So, and then of course, why senior leadership is their support is vital. Flexibility and that get going. I think you probably hear that a lot, but why that is so crucial too. Next slide, please, Baum.
Yes.
So I was going to kick off with planning, why planning is crucial, why it works. And I wanted to sort of kick off this myself, because part of my story is that we didn't really plan the transformation, the first transformation that I did at the FT. It was all a little bit chaotic. And if only I'd had that playbook or that guidebook that I spoke about earlier, I would have realized that maybe like to come up with a plan might have been much better, even if you adapted that plan, than not having a plan at all. So and when we talk about planning, we mean we don't mean it's rigid, by the way. It is about at least thinking ahead, setting your objectives and your vision of what you would like to achieve, but actually it's flexible so that you can adapt and review and change that plan if necessary, it really helps you to sell your idea to colleagues, and that can be really, really hard. So something like a roadmap will actually aid that. It aids understanding of why the project is necessary and what it means for the business, actually, and also people's roles. It can really help them identify where they fit into the transformation. And of course, it should have your timelines and timescales of tasks, what is to be achieved by when, because that helps you to, check whether your project is still on track or not, and manage those expectations. I mean, Bal, what do you think about planning?
But obviously, all of those above. And, a lot of the time when we have stress about innovation, because it's obviously maybe the ultimate goal of a certain type of company, we can get into do mode. But then getting into do mode doesn't allow you to be reflexive and at least create a type of framework that others can understand and attach to, especially when we talked a lot about innovation in big corporates. So if you create a type of framework, people can attach to it, but also you need that sense of flexibility. Also, another aspect I think is important, if you involve others in the planning, it helps them to be a stakeholder. And if people are a stakeholder, they're more involved and their motivation is higher, and they don't feel that it's just you doing this, when likelihood is you're involving many other people in your organization. So it creates that type of frame and it makes you stop. And maybe it's better to stop than to go fast, because it's very hard to predict what's going to happen tomorrow with the famous VUCA model and what we're seeing right now in the world regarding technology, post-COVID, and geopolitics. So I think that's a good one there. Yeah, let's get to the next one. Yeah. So on the next point, in the book, you've got to identify. You've got to identify your problem. I mean, why is that important? Because when I ask students what is the first phase of innovation, they'll talk about an idea. But an idea is something very abstract. So we really have to think of the problem, thinking, who are we going to help? Guy Kawasaki, who helped to found Apple, he would say it's about the expertise, about the opportunity, and about the passion to make it happen. So who are we actually trying to help? And are we really going to benefit them in some way? And then we can actually validate the problem. So you marry the solution, but you've got to identify the problem, and you've got to really think about if it's going to be smart, if it's going to work, who you're trying to help, and you've got to be specific. As I always say to many companies, you're not necessarily Coca-Cola. You haven't got the one thing that everybody buys, but you have to think, who is that market? How to understand them and understand the persona and adapt what you're doing to them. I think that's very important, because you need the perspective of the people you're trying to serve, which might actually be very, very different to your own perspective. And in the end, you want people who are going to fund the project or pay for it. Now, today's cycles of innovation are extremely fast. Before, you could have a product on the shelf for maybe 5 years. Now the cycles could be a question of months, especially when we're talking about digital and software. So what was relevant today might not be relevant in 2 years. And that shows us success of the startups, who are very scalable and they have less bureaucracy. So Lindsay, what do you think?
I think that last point that you were making there was absolutely key. I think it might have been the law firm actually that we interviewed that said this. It's no good if you're slow, in terms of if you identify your problem and then you don't get going quite quickly, because if you take 6 months to identify your problem, it's changed already, and then you're behind the curve. I totally sort of get this. We call it a challenge sometimes, or in the media business we talk about audiences. Who are your audiences? It's the same as your customer or your users, and that's quite hard for journalists to get their head around the idea that actually you really are having to identify who your audiences are online these days, quite different from when you just produce a newspaper, and that takes a whole other way of going about producing your product. And we have immediate examples in the book around how they identify their problem now and grow the newspaper business, which can be challenging. Should we go on
And
to
we
the next
talk,
slide?
yeah,
Oh,
and we talk,
sorry, you want to
yeah,
say
that's
something? That's
fine.
fine.
Yeah, and we talk
Yeah.
about the business case and things about the persona and actually using things like Canvas. So a lot of things that came from the startup paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go on.
Use of data to back up your plan. As we were saying with the poll, it was interesting that nobody picked data at all. I guess there were too many other options, maybe. Why is data so critical? It's behind everything now. Every business is a data business. So as I was saying at the start of this call, many businesses are beginning to centralize their data, i.e. make it the hub of their business, and then everything works off the data around that in a circular kind of way. So in terms of your digital transformation, you definitely need data to frame your plan. It helps you back up your case. It's evidence for your case, but it has to be good data. It can't be biased or skewed or historically wrong in some way. But if you get it right, and you can get it right, it can enable you to sell the vision in presentations in order to get people on board. So spend time on that data that your plan's based on, and it will give you a firm foundation to build on. So data is very much driving decision making. We saw that time and again in the book. In fact, sticking with the law firm example, one law firm told us that, you know, when you think of law firms where they're reactive, where the customer comes in with some kind of offense, they need a legal team to sort something out for them. Instead of that kind of customer, they were using data to spot consumer trends in the business, in the legal business, to then sort of approach companies and say, we've identified this type of legal pattern that's happening across several businesses that we deal with. We think you might need our advice on this. Quite a different way of doing business for a law firm. And that all came from looking at their data. So keep it simple as well. Your colleagues need to understand it. We're not data heads. I don't know, maybe Val can speak for himself in a minute, but I'm not a data head, but I have to understand data. Everybody has to understand data on some level now. If you don't, you'll start to fall behind in the career race. So you need to understand it. They need to see, your colleagues will need to see where they fit in and what will be required to do and why it is important for the business to change. Bao, what do you think about this?
So I agree with all of that, and we're aligned there. And we've seen that when people make decisions, and we talk about it in the book, it's based on logic or emotion. But you'd be very surprised what the data will tell you that might contradict the reality of the scenario. So it helps you to be tactical, and it helps you to be more objective. Now, we also talked about the quality of data, the bias, like who's producing the data and what are the questions they're asking, what are the different angles. So there's a lot of third-party data, but even simple things around data, like getting your own validation, can help you, because that can be very, very specific to your business or what you're trying to do. So in that respect, it is crossing across the board. And, now it's common to do a master in big data because it's like a transversal thread to everything. And if we mix that with things like AI, which is very connected to data, that is something that's going across the board and it's changing how we do business, not just in how we're developing products and services, but also about the procedures underneath. So it's going to help you to be more tactical, maybe eliminate risk to a certain level, and make sure that you're more likely to be successful, although we know that there's no guarantee. What we're trying to say here, we're trying to mitigate the risk so that you can predict success and you're more likely to make it happen.
Yeah,
That's good.
exactly.
Yeah.
I like it. Make it happen.
Make it happen. Yeah. And then if I could start maybe on this one, so mapping out, this is something very important that people forget. And this is something I've had to do personally on many projects, is the art of lobby. So for any project you're going to do, you cannot do it by yourself. You need a team. And even in this case, we are co-authors, but behind us were probably hundreds of people in the process of the production and the development and the launch of the book. So you cannot do anything well by yourself, whether you're in a small company or a big corporation. So you have to map out who are your stakeholders, who are the people you have to move to make it happen. So there's a lot of dependencies with different stakeholders. You cannot achieve success by yourself, but what I would always say is you find your champions. So if you can find champions who can move the needle, you're more likely to make things happen because you're going to influence a whole organization. And what I found in my own experience and through the book is that the champion is not always the person on the top. We're going to talk about that later. The champion could be somebody who could send a message or have those in the corridor conversations to gain momentum and maybe impetus and support for your project. So it's good to frame that, to make a map of all the people involved in the change. And the interesting thing there, even if the change is about, digital process, each stakeholder will want something different. The supplier will want money, the investor wants a return, maybe the leader wants the credit, maybe the technical person wants to learn something. So finding and making that map of who they are and what their needs are to give them something to move towards the bigger goal. I think that's what I think about. And Lindsay, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm itching to come in on this because I'm thinking of Eloise's question right at the beginning there. What was surprising about the book? This has come back to me in a flash that actually this was surprising to me in the book that I should have mapped out when I was doing the Financial Times transformation. I should have mapped out who was going to help me because once I think this was a learning point for me. Once I realized, oh yeah, this is what you do. You map it out. That would have helped to actually put names down and work out who were going to help you champion the cause and buy in early and who wouldn't, because there were an awful lot of people who didn't help initially. And you often find that in the typical change curve anyway, that you'll get your early adopters or whatever. But when I was doing this 10 years ago, by the way, I should add, all these transformation projects I was involved in, they were successful, but I took a long time trying to work it out because I didn't have my playbook. That's why I went off and wrote this. But absolutely, just endorse Val, if you think about what doesn't work, it doesn't really work not to map it out. And I learned that the hard way. It absolutely works to map out and really put names down, actually, if you're in the process of doing a transformation project, to really think about who is going to help you.
And also, I'd say before you transition to the next slide, it's also about being efficient with time, because you can waste a lot of time with people who are not willing or able to support you. So it's just having a bit of strategic plan and testing it out and then moving along. Because sometimes you have to be very brutal, because normally your project has a time span and a budget, and you've got to be on target for that. Otherwise, it's going to be very unsuccessful and it's not going to get a mandate, and it's going to create a lot of disappointment. So this is almost from the knowledge, fast tracking that.
Yeah, that's very true. And again, you're reminding me, I think I spent a lot of my time fighting when I should have spent my time actually identifying the early adopters and just building the resistance. I mean, as in, not that people are going to resist me, I mean the resistance to the fighters.
Well, you could have avoided all these cups of tea, but they were also nice, I imagine. And a few pints.
Oh well, it all led to this wonderful relationship that we have now. And had I known your conflict resolution expertise as well, I think I needed that at the time. Never mind. I think that's a whole other webinar.
Yeah.
I feel we're digressing as we do the Bal and Lindsay Act. So number 5, why senior leadership support is vital. And I can actually talk again from personal experience. I think we're getting the idea of how I ended up being inspired to write this book and the kind of themes that are in the book with Bal's help. Senior leadership, I can speak personally about this. It was absolutely vital to all the projects I was involved with at the FT in terms of delivery, that you had to have the editor-in-chief and the board absolutely backing you. It didn't mean that they were going to carry it out. I was carrying it out along with other people. But the reason why it's so important, particularly with large change, any change, I guess, but particularly with the large transformation projects that I was involved with, if I didn't have that support, it did go very political at some points, and people were trying to stop it, bring it down, stop it in its tracks, and so on. And that's why senior leadership was so important, because once they realised, no, this is going ahead, and you have to get on board. You're the problem. You're the problem. It's not Lindsay. And that was great. That was really great. So In terms of the book, though, looking more widely and right across the business sector, this is very, very true. It doesn't matter what line of business you're in, that right at the start, you need to have the support of your senior leadership. It is absolutely key as a change agent, and you will need their backing to be continuous. So you may even have to go back to your senior champions many times and ask them to make your mandate clear, because your mandate will be questioned very likely, being questioned by colleagues as to, why are you doing this? You can't tell me what to do. You're not really telling people what to do. You're trying to persuade them and get them to buy in. They're just challenging you as to, by what authority are you carrying this out? So it goes to the heart of your status to carry out the transformation. And yes, combat the why you. Well, I've just naturally talked about it, Pal. What do you have to say about this from your experience?
Well, that's a big thing, because innovation is very sexy. And the one who says, oh, I'm going to do it, it's actually a trap. Because you go there, we're going to innovate and change stuff, but then everyone might go against you, because there could be ego saying, why are you the one to do it, who's supporting you? And very much they can shut you down because you are codependent on others. So getting the mandate from above is important, and getting the people who can send the message to the right people. So if I have a mandate from above, it's a lot easier because everyone has to be aligned. And we can see that in how countries manage innovation. I was recently in Saudi Arabia. They have 6 massive projects they're doing, and they have to happen because they're mandated by the royal family. So the pressure is to make it happen because there's no alternative to not happening. When you're doing this in organization, you're given the project without the clear mandate, it's a lot harder, it'll probably take longer, and then you have to find your champions who are sending the messages. So it's a very different place, whether you have the mandate from the top and all the resources are aligned, or you're starting from the bottom and you've got to move and convince people. And then at the end, maybe the people at the top might be convinced or not. So they don't have to be so involved, but they have to clear a path so that others will align whether they like it or not. Because we talk about soft power and skills, but sometimes you have to say, just do it, and you have to be tough because people don't like change. There's a psychology about resistance of change. And if you want people to change, you either have to give them a benefit or a threat or something that could be bad for them. So that's why getting it from the top can align the path, even though other challenges will be present. That's what I'd say.
I'm not sure that we've necessarily focused on that so much in this presentation, but certainly in the book we have a whole chapter what we've even called dealing with the dark side, the challenges of change.
No, because we are complex human beings and we all have different interests. That's why you have to find out what those interests are to move things forward. But if it's coming from the top, it's like it has to happen, and there's an alignment of things that are not always visible for you. Because as we found out in our own experience, and Lindsay has so much experience there as well, is that there's often the informal channels like the cup of tea in the lobby, all those in-between meeting chats are actually very effective to create that bond and that idea that this is important, because it's about relationships, and relationships can be very complex. Now, getting to that, keeping it flexible, we're not talking about yoga, but we did talk at the end of the chapter about looking after yourself, because, this is very stressful to make innovation happen and change. You have to be in a good place, because it's like a marathon. You have to be in good health. But when you think about flexible, we mentioned it before, it's good to have a strategy and a framework. But as things are moving so fast, especially in innovation externally, and maybe in a bigger organization, maybe politically, you have to be willing to adjust. Now, there's many stories about companies who went into change and innovation, and they took 8 years to launch a product, and it was already out of date. So that's why you have to keep your ear on the ground, and you have to try to keep on being relevant. Now, innovation is not a straight line. If it was, and you read the book and you innovated, you'd be the owner of a big tech like Google. It doesn't happen like that. It's an up and down curve. It's not a straight line. So that's where the flexibility can help you as you get more data and information to change what you're doing. And when we talk about the business schools, where we both teach, a lot of the time we talk about the power of failure. So it's making a mistake, and deciding to change because you've realized something new once you've got qualitative data to make sure you can apply that. And that's something that a more traditional firm will find more difficult because they have a lot more bureaucracy. So we've got to be open and accept it's not going to be easy. It can be a bumpy road, and have that energy to adapt according to things that are changing around you, or maybe new data that can help you to get a better result. So having that frame, like a skeleton we put there, but then be ready to adapt according to what's going on around you, thinking about the end goal. So Lindsay, what about that?
Yeah, so I think really, as you're talking it through there, where you say keep it flexible, in my mind, it's like experimentation. You hear that a lot, or as you were saying, embrace failure. In fact, I hate that term, embrace failure, because I think sometimes it can give people the wrong impression. Like you often hear people go, "Oh, I failed. That's great. Look at me, I've failed." But hang on a minute. When companies use the term embrace failure, they don't mean go and drop 50 million or even 1 million on a project and make a loss, right? Because if you do something like that, you're going to lose your job. And we talk about that in the book as well, that what do we mean by embracing failure or experimentation? Yes, you've got to have this iterative way of working, this sort of flexible, adapt, small teams, actually. Just when I talk to journalists, it could be 3 journalists, it could be a reporter, a news editor on a story, making a newsletter, and maybe they're working with somebody in marketing. That's all it takes to get an experiment off the ground. And then they have to keep analyzing the data, making sure it's what the audience wants over perhaps an 8 to 12 week period. You either have to scale it up in that time frame, or you have to close it down, because you don't want to spend too much time and money on it. You don't want it to, if it's going to fail, you don't want some huge failure that's going to cost a lot of money and potentially cost your career or your job, and you're out. And I have seen people having to lose their jobs because they did spend too much money on a project that didn't go anywhere. So that's what I think about keeping it flexible. Absolutely key to how you work now, how you are in the workplace these days. Should we go on to the next slide,
Yeah.
Bal?
And
Yeah,
that word
okay.
agility, it's
Yeah, oh
about
yes,
being
I forgot
agile,
agile, yeah.
that big word. And also,
Yeah.
as we have many examples in the book of companies where they pivoted, they adjusted the initial idea, or they even perished, and then they could come up and be successful. So that is key today. And that's why many larger corporates are working with startups to solve their problems in the concept called open innovation. Now, the get going piece, it's about, maybe 80%, well, a bit less, is actually about starting. Because when you have an idea of a massive project about innovation, it sounds really exciting, but it's like a very big meal. It's very easy to be apathetic and say, what do we do now? But you've got to make a move, because you've got to give it some momentum. So even if it's imperfect, put some energy to give it a go. And that might just be questioning people and building up your plan, and building up your plan with the different stakeholders so they can get ownership of it. So then again, it's a bit about the structure. Have something that is a frame, but you've got to be organic, because you don't know where it's going to take you. Being ready to adapt based on the validation and the data that you're receiving, having your ear onto the ground, especially if it's a highly vested project, because then you could have a massive project which is successful because nobody actually wants to buy it, or not enough people want to buy it. And using agile management methodology, which a lot of the companies that we talk to use, whether they're big or small, where you experiment, you iterate, you keep on trying, the Kaizen method, and then you're already getting the data points, which we talked about, so important to say, with this data we have, after we've done a scrum and we've done a quick move, what does it tell us? Are we on track? Do we have to adjust it slightly, or should we stop and do something different? Now, especially important in the world of the product life cycle is so short. That's why, digital firms, and the title is Going Digital, How to Manage Change. And that's why they can go from 0 to millions of users very quickly. And we have examples in the book of digital banks like Monzo. But Lindsay, what do you say about
Yeah,
that?
I mean, let's get going and let's get going. In the book, we talked to Mapfre, the insurance company based in Spain, and the way that was a legacy company in insurance is very staid and a bit perhaps boring, and not actually what the Generation Z wanted to buy into. They were turning away from the insurance market as future consumers. So what did Mapfre do? They did something really interesting. They set up an innovation hub. And that was sort of bringing either a startup approach in or university students in, sort of younger generation people into the business to sort of listen to their ideas and get going on some small scale projects, which they could then maybe build up into the larger insurer and take out to build successful consumer products that Generation Z would be interested in. And actually they were very successful, and they built it up to, well, from the book, I think it was around 40 different projects from memory.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's still successful today, because that was only a couple of years ago, and it really worked really well.
And then
so
this,
yeah,
go ahead.
No, do you want to? No, come in.
No, because I was actually on the innovation board and of Mapfre, and there was the interesting thing about innovation, there are things that can happen that you don't expect. So as you said rightly, insurance industry is seen as great, but they need the young techies that all companies need now, like a Google. So they had a problem in attracting talent, like the data people, the AI people, for example, and the people who are working in digital. So by doing this process of working with startups, they sent a message to the market that we're investing in new talent and we are transforming as an organization. And I was told by them, it actually helped them to recruit the type of talent that would normally want to go to Google and Amazon. So when you start this process, you've got to be open to the direction you're going, but maybe things that happen on the side that could be of benefit to you to keep on being relevant. Because in the end, that's the question. What do you do to keep on being relevant as an organization and serving and hopefully being profitable? Yeah.
So really, is there a final slide, or are we at
That's
the end?
the final
So
one.
I was going to say, yeah, okay. So really, I'd say our top takeaways are: make sure you plan your transformation. Certainly, map out who's going to help you or perhaps even hinder you. Use data to back your plan, and make sure you've got senior leadership support, or certainly champions of you. Actually, never lose sight of that, and keep it flexible. Eloise, do you want to come in, or Bal, do you want to say anything else?
No, Lindsay, I mean, as we've always done, this has been fantastic. We've planned this event, we prepared it. Also, we were open to be flexible in the moment and reacting to each other. And now what we'd like is, for the audience, we're going to have some questions through that we can respond to, as this is a live session, and we wanted to make it relevant for you. So I think, we've been very strict on our timing, being both brought up in England. We've had over 40 minutes, so now we've got maybe 15 for Q&A. Yeah. So, please go ahead.
That was really interesting and lots of fantastic stuff. I have a few questions, but yeah, if anyone wants to add questions to the Q&A tab or in the chat, please do. So here's the first one. With regards to identifying the problem and how fast we are moving, how can we always know what the problem is when the needs of the people we are serving are always changing?
Well, I'd like to start off. I mean, I would say we have to be very close on the ground regarding validation. And that's why what I say to companies as well, and a lot of it comes from the book, is that you got to get out of the room and the office room. You got to get out there and speak to people, and you've got to test things out. And that's why you've got to talk to them, but also with the data, you can predict certain trends. So what we're trying to say is we're mitigating the risk when there's always risk. And the interesting thing about innovation, a lot of innovation is planned and successful, but a lot of it comes by chance. But it can't come by chance if you don't put the ingredients there and you're very close to the ground, especially trying to get into the mentality of the people you're trying to serve, because they are the ones who are going to fund and make the project live. So I think that closeness and also getting out and speaking to your public and also watching the trends is sort of that combination.
Yeah, and I'd add into this actually that you definitely have to do what we call it audience analytics, audience data analytics. Even journalists have to do this now. And rather than always changing, I think what it does, it shifts over a period. Maybe it's 3 months or 6 months. Certainly in journalistic terms, if you think stories that people were reading a year ago, they're not reading now, the topics, if you think about it like that, it'll be different topics, and that's how it changes and evolves. And that's why you have to be looking at your data, and you can make that analogy to whatever business you're in terms of your customer life cycle. What are they consuming now, and what are they going to be consuming in 6 months or a year's time? And that's why you've got to be doing your analytics to be able to predict the trends or be on top of it, and then adapt as necessary, adapt your strategy as necessary.
And also, I'd just add quickly to that before we move on. It's like also the field work. Now, Lindsay is in Oslo. I'm in Reykjavik. I'm in Iceland. But there's one idea you have of the country, but there's a very different thing being here on the ground. So it reminds me of one anecdote I think I've shared with Lindsay is when I was in Mali and we stopped in our coach and the kids were running around after me, but I had an empty bottle of water, a plastic bottle. And I was wondering, well, for me, the value of the bottle is the water. And then it took me some time to realize that those poor kids, they wanted the plastic bottle because they spend 3 hours a day collecting water from a well. So it's all about getting the perspective, but getting it from the people you're trying to serve, which is partly a strategic exercise, but there's nothing like being one-to-one and being in the context. And that, I think, is very key to success.
Fantastic. Next question. How do we guard against mission creep, where every stakeholder has their own priorities?
Now, I'll start with that one. I think Lindsay has had a lot of experience of that, maybe, on big projects. So the interesting thing, it's curious because when we talked about it, we talked about the fact that if you want to make something happen with a group of stakeholders, no project is made of just one person. There might be an overall goal of innovation project X, but each stakeholder has different needs inside. So on one side, you need to be open to the different priorities and serve them with each important stakeholder, but then you've got to keep them on track to the bigger goal unless the goal will shift. So it's a subtle thing of understanding their individual needs to push their piece in the bigger picture, but then always trying to say, where are we going? What do we need to do? So Lindsay, what about that one?
Yeah, I mean, the way I read that is, what do you need to stop doing, or what are the warning signs of when a project should actually be stopped? It's failing. And that can be very, very difficult, particularly if it's your project and you feel it's like your baby, you can't let it go. And we do have examples of this in the book where people talk openly about it. And these mission creep, it can go on for 2 years. You know, that the project's kind of limping on, it's not really going anywhere. In fact, people know it's not really working, and yet it's still sort of lingering around. The warnings, some of the warning signs that you can get, that people are leaving the project and not being replaced. That's often a big sign that this is going wrong. And also the other side to it is that you're not, if you're getting mission creep, you're not really reviewing what's happening. You're not monitoring it, and you're not talking about what you're going to do to stop the mission creep. Is it that the project needs to stop? Is it that you need to adapt and pivot in another direction, or actually shut the whole thing down? And that can be a very, very difficult decision that people struggle with. But we've got case studies and help for you in the book to help you make that type of decision. But it's very, very difficult, and don't get stuck into that yourself. Really, really wake up and be brave. If it's your project, put your hand up and say, look, the best thing we can do here is end it.
And
put it out of its misery.
And maybe having somebody you can buddy up with, who can help you to reality, because you do get inside of a bubble of making that change, and also looking after yourself, because this can be extremely stressful. And as you said, Lindsay, we're so lucky. We have so many people who shared their real experience, and not just in an anonymous way, of real examples. And that is really the key when we have documented examples that are even public, but we are told about the mechanism behind the scenes that many people might be aware of. So I think that is something very unique about the book, and that makes it so tactical. You know, it's a book to think about, but it's actually say, let's do it like this, step
Oh
by
yeah,
step.
for sure. In fact, we give people tactics, don't we? I think we've even got
Yeah,
sections that are called tactics.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, actually, I was thinking, Lindsay, we should, and Eloise and Sarah, we should set up a startup using the book as a guide and see if it works. So, you
Yeah,
know, if we're better than AI, you know.
yeah, exactly. Or a tactical hit squad, I think. Yeah.
Um, Here's another one. So, although of course they are all important, which do you think is the most important of the 7 keys?
Wow, I mean,
I can
you know,
go.
go
Have
for
you
it.
got an idea? Do you
Well,
want
I
me to
mean,
go?
I will, I would, for me, planning in the sense is the starter, but I think, it's a bit of the attitude when you're ready to get into this. It's a bit like being a sports person. You're ready for something that's high performance, it's very challenging. One thing is the technical stuff, but then your mindset about doing it, and also, knowing your limits. So you're not going to be in the long run. You know it's not necessarily going to be easy, but you're going to give it your best shot. So I think your own, apart from the obvious things, your own state of mind, and we do talk about it, to affront this as an opportunity and to be ready that it's not necessarily going to be easy. So I think
Ah,
that the
yeah.
attitude part, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's like having the attitude that you're going into battle. Like just
Yeah.
bringing it all back. The trauma of it. The therapy now that I'm still in. Like this is I'm in my therapy session right now. If you're wondering what I'm talking about. But for me, it'd be map out who will help you. This whole thing has brought it all back to me. That's what I should have done right at the beginning. I guess it comes under planning, but even maybe before planning, really think with names, name those people only to yourself. I'm not saying publish it or anything. No, do not publish it, but do think about seriously who is actually going to help you, who are volunteers, who are people that you've worked well with in the past and might buy into this idea that you've got, or this project that you've been given. I actually did start to do that probably midway through at some point, where I suddenly realized that there were volunteers around the place that were key. They weren't team leaders, they didn't have the big job title, but they were key to persuading people, the wider community, to come into it.
But also say it's a
Absolutely, map it
validation.
out.
Yeah, but I would say it's a validation because it's a very lonely place when you're given this type of project, but
Yeah.
also get other people's opinions, because a secret I've seen myself is when you ask for something specific, it might be yes or no. But when you ask in an authentic way for advice, people will give you that. And that new information can be gold, because a lot of the information is actually, not visible, and it's hidden because it's tied to personal relationships. So it's trying to uncover that, what's visible to you and what's invisible, to move it forward, especially in big organizations. And as you know well yourself, Lindsay, in FT, where you did something incredible, but it was very, very pioneering.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard place to be as a pioneer, but we got a great book out of it. So that's the other thing. I'll just end on the fact that if you are going through a major transformation, just remember, keep notes. It's material at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yeah. And it actually makes you conscious about the experience you've had, because it's like teaching somebody something. If you know something and you've been born with it, it's hard for you to explain it. But when you have to examine it, then you can pull out all the golden nuggets. And I think that's what we're trying to do with the book, give you the gold so that you can suffer a bit less and you can make things happen effectively.
Right, and one last question. Other than improving relationships or bonds, how can I gain the support of senior leadership?
Perfect. Lindsay, you want to go for that one?
Yeah, I will go for that actually, because this is actually quite a tactical question. That if you don't have the direct line to the senior leadership, it goes into mapping out who does. We called them consiglieres, as in The Godfather.
Champions.
Yeah, you can call them champion. We call it an advisor, the consigliere role, right? Who are these influential people on the senior leadership? You'll probably know them. Target them, take them out for a coffee, run your idea past them, and start to get them into your influential network and build up towards the senior leadership.
And I would agree with that, because a lot of the time, if you go directly to the leaders, you're making it very visible and very maybe possibly bureaucratic. But if you have experience of working with somebody, if they've recommended you, you can get the ball rolling. And there's these informal conversations that can actually make things move forward. So I think having those inner champions is key, especially if the mandate hasn't come from the top and you're doing it in a way that doesn't get formalized. Especially in big organization, when it gets formal, then bureaucracy starts to hit, which can be another barrier.
Fantastic. Right. That was great. So I'm just going to share my screen. So thank you, Lindsay and Val. If anyone wants to keep in touch, we've got Lindsay's email address, and you can connect with Val on LinkedIn. So hopefully you'll get some questions and connect through that. And yes, thank you everyone for attending the event today, and anyone watching the recording. Our next session is in November. Our book of the month will be Supercharged Teams by Pamela Hamilton. That's on Thursday, the 21st of November at 2 p.m. UK time. And her session will be on how teams can harness the power of collective intelligence. So hopefully that will be another interesting one. So thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully Lindsay and Val, you'll get your flights.
Yes,
no now.
Thank you very much, Louisa, and all our guests. Take care and talk soon.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.